finally have my voice today, so I'm very glad that I get to spend this time with you and use my voice again. I had a little cold over the weekend, which wasn't too much fun. But I wanted to greet you all here in Boston. I'm at Boston University School of Theology for seminary, and it's just been a whirlwind. Tomorrow's my first midterm. I haven't taken an exam since high school. My college was really different, so this will be, my first exam in grad school and first exam since high school. So yeah, there's a lot going on in my life, and I want to hear from you as well. So any questions that you have, I have my computer open over here so I can see your chats. So let me know what kind of questions you have, and we'll go from there. You can ask me anything about the church, about my life, about seminary, about my book. So go ahead, you can send a message in the comments. I think you need to be logged in, part of YouTube security. So if you want to log in and just type up a question, I will respond to whatever you have to say. And in the meantime, you can grab a mug of tea. Mine has the Hebrew alphabet on it, and this is why I like Teaology, because we just get to chill here and have some tea. So send a question in on the comments bar, and I will look for your comments. And just so you know, my partner did call me twice during the first time I tried to film this, and so that's why it cut out 2 times, but he was calling to help me with some technical stuff, so I guess it was okay. But in the meantime, I wanted to share with you, until I get some more questions from folks, I wanted to share with you something that has been really vital to my experience in seminary. So we've talked a lot about, in this last month and a half, 2 months that I've been here, about spiritual practices. And that may sound too hippie for some of you, but it's come to mean a lot to me. And I used to think, oh, discipline, how could that possibly help me? If I journaled every day, that wouldn't actually help me. Or if I was intentional about praying all the time, how would that help me? But now I've been forced at seminary to do disciplines, to practice them. So almost every other night I journal, and I reflect on the ways that I experienced God during the day and how I shared God with others. And being more consciously aware of this has changed the way that I interact with others and the world around me. It sounds cliche, but after I did this for a week, I looked around and I actually felt the world differently. So I want to encourage you to try some different practices, whether that be different ways of praying, whether that be coloring for prayer, or finding different prayers online, or journaling, or, lots of different practices that you can do. It looks like we do have a question. So someone asks, "Hello, Timothy. Glad you're here." Timothy asked, "How is your life after my wonderful speech in the United Methodist Conference? Do you think the Methodist Church can become inclusive, or will it need to split?" That's a really great question, Timothy. 2 questions in one. Thank you. Lots of content here. So life after General Conference has been a real whirlwind. I mean, if you had said that 3 minutes could change your life this drastically, I wouldn't have believed you. And yet here I am. I think the most difficult thing was learning how to tweet. I went from like 50 Twitter followers to almost 4,000, overnight. And so that was just kind of mind-blowing that for the first time I had to manage a Twitter and understand how Twitter works. But also I've had the great opportunity of visiting 35 churches all over 11 states of the US, and talking with Methodists in Germany and Ethiopia and Kenya. So from that one speech, God has just brought amazing things into my life, and I get to be part of people's stories, and all of you are part of my story now. And so if anything's changed, the most change that's happened is a new interconnectedness. I feel so connected like never before to United Methodists in California and Arizona, and Kenya and Ethiopia and the Philippines and Germany. So it's all been kind of hectic and chaotic, and so that drives me to hope that no matter what happens to the Methodist Church, maybe we'll split, maybe we won't. The truth is, I don't have a crystal ball any more than you do, so I don't know the answer. But I do know that there are people around the world that are fighting for inclusion, and that have been for decades. And so to see a church like Mohedo First UMC in Kenya become a reconciling church, the first one outside of the US, is a pretty big deal, because it shows that our global connection is important, right? If we want to make safe spaces for LGBTQ people, not just in the US, then we're going to need some kind of structure that allows us to do that. So if our church splits, or if it stays together in a more inclusive way, I hope that some part of our global connection will remain, because that's the place where I believe we have the potential to truly transform the world. To make safe spaces for queer people in countries that aren't accepting yet, to work with the people who have hidden LGBTQ Bible studies, who are hidden right now, but who know that there's a network out there that supports them. So that's a really long answer to your two-part question, and I hope that helped. So if you have more questions, feel free to send them over in the comments here. I see another one. Thanks, Timothy, again. At what point does staying in a church become too abusive for being part of the conversation, for being part of the LGBTQ community? If I'm monopolizing the conversation, I apologize. No worry, Timothy. You are the only one in the conversation, so you have every right to. But real quick, let's take a sip of tea, because this is Teaology. In the future, I'll have cool, soundtrack music to play during the tea. And the rest of you, feel free to send in some questions. So really great question. At what point does it become abusive for LGBTQ people to stay in a church, that continually is harming us? And I think this is a very personal question. And so I won't claim to have the answer for every queer person. But I think for me, what's important is my local congregation isn't an oppressive one. It's one that isn't quite open yet, but I know that the people are committed to this journey towards inclusion, that they're opening their minds for the first time, and that together we can get, these honestly older people who never had to really question the Bible before. We're moving this community of older folks into a place of understanding. And so for me, in my context, it's not a place that is harmful, because it's a place where the people that I'm in community with are willing to listen and are willing to learn. But I know that not every context is like that. So if your church is not a safe space where your identity isn't valued, or, it's harmful for you to be there, then of course you have to do what's best for you and find space. But for me, my staying means that I get to bring that conversation along, and I get to watch people have their minds transformed as they question who God really does love and how all-encompassing God's love really can be. So that's another long answer to your question. So if there are other folks, feel free to send your questions in, over the comments bar there. This is my first time doing Teaology since before last General Conference, I think. So it's been a long time. All right, we have another question, but real quick, take a sip of tea, because this is Teaology. Now, in my head, you're all saying that with me at home, so I hope you are, and it's not just in my head, but I'll never know if you weren't anyway. All right, Carolyn, follow-up question to Timothy's. But at what point of the journey will people who... Lovely TR. At what point in the journey will people who have left the UMC be able to return to whatever iteration of Methodism comes next? That's a really great question, and I love that question. There are lots of folks who their consciences made them leave the church because their churches were oppressive, and our denomination as a whole continues to exclude, at least formally, LGBTQ people. And so for those folks, And I have some good friends who have had to leave the Methodist Church. It was safer for them, or it was more in line with their values to leave the church. So the question is, at what point can those people come back if they want to the inclusive form of Methodism that comes next? So my hope is, and this is where I think the core is of this new church for me. So if we forget the denomination for a second, get rid of the United Methodist Church in your mind. No matter what happens, whether we stay together or split into tiny pieces, my hope, and the whole reason that I traveled to 11 states this summer, and the whole reason I plan to go to Germany and Kenya and Ethiopia next summer, the whole reason that I'm trying to be in this network and community of inclusive churches is so that whatever comes next for us, we have a network, a community of inclusive-minded folks, so that when an exodus happens, if an exodus happens, of folks needing to leave the United Methodist Church, or folks coming back in because we've turned into an inclusive church, we have this solid network and foundation of inclusive churches that said we will stick together because we share this collective vision of a church that is inclusive and reflects the image of God. And so whether that's in the Methodist Church or something else, if we all fall apart, the most important thing is that we inclusive churches and people willing to go on that journey would bind ourselves together so that it's not just some free-for-all, but that we have this network, this community of inclusive churches that can welcome back the people that left and that can build, a truly transformative movement around the world. So that's my hope for the church. That was a really great question. So if you have any other questions, keep them coming in the comments bar. You might have to log in first. I'm looking over here at my computer to see some of your questions. Real quick, let's take a sip of tea, because this is, say it with me, Teaology. Nice. I'm sure you all said it with me. And imagine that nice background music playing. All right. So, as you can tell, my voice is kind of fading because I had a little cold this weekend, and the people in my house were really great because they took care of me, brought me lots of soup and tea, and that made me able to be here with you tonight to answer some questions. So let's see, we've got some more questions here. Do you think it is possible for us to stay together? Really great question. And really hard question, right? Is it possible for the Methodist Church to stay together? I think there are some folks who are going to leave on both sides, and I won't question their judgments. There are people who need to follow their conscience and people who need to leave. My hope is, however, that I've seen my family, for example. My family, I grew up in a very small town that was exclusively minded. There wasn't another gay person or gay couple in my town. I didn't know being gay existed. You were either straight or you were wrong. I didn't know there was any other option. And yet, in college, when I came out to myself and then went home during my freshman year of college and came out to my family, who had said, some passive, microaggressive, homophobic things, but when I came out to them, it was a slow process where we had conversations, and I watched, my dad who watches Fox News and my mom who used to watch Fox News. I watched both of them slowly come along this journey and say, I don't quite understand everything yet, but I know that I love you, and so I'm willing to go on the journey. So for those folks in the Methodist Church who are willing to say, I don't quite understand all of this because I haven't grown up with it or don't understand, but I value you and I see God in you, so I'm going to go on that journey with you. Now, I know that's not everybody. There are folks who say, I'm just some sodomite who is trying to take the church apart. Okay, so I realize not everyone will stay. So can we stay together? I don't know. That's up to everyone else to say if we're willing to see God in each other in a way that allows me as a queer person to express my calling and answer my calling, and allows space for us to take people along the journey. Because my parents didn't change their mind overnight, and I don't expect anyone else to either. but I have to be able to be me in this space. And other queer people and people of color and women need to be able to be themselves in this space. So we have a few more questions and comments. We have a former pastor in Salvation Army. Okay. Being bisexual didn't help. That's really sad to hear that you were defrocked. Your superiors even monitored your social media activity. Yikes. They will not allow me to ever become ordained in the denomination again because of this. I had to find a new way home. Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Timothy. Thanks for sharing some of your story. It's really, humbling to hear these stories. And as I traveled this summer, to 35 different churches, I heard stories of people who, joined the army because they thought at least if they had joined the army, they wouldn't be home and they wouldn't bring shame to their families for being gay. And so I've heard a lot of stories of folks who have, been kicked out of their jobs or kicked out of the army or, just felt so unloved that they did things they never thought they would do. And that's a real hard reality of being in the LGBTQ community. So I'm really thankful for you for sharing your story and for, all of those folks who have shared their stories, because our stories are powerful and they have the ability to make this whole conversation about people and not just issues. If there is a split, someone asks, real quick, need some tea. If there is a split, would you stay and still fight? I know for me, I made the hard decision to stay and hope I can be a Georgia hard decision. We did. Thank you for that message. So if the church does split, would I stay and fight? Well, that's a tricky question because, okay, if the church splits, we don't know how it would split. How many new churches would form? Would it be a progressive church and a conservative church? Would there be a centrist church? What would happen? Would the WCA just take their minority in the US and the people they've paid off and just try and do their own little thing? So my hope is, the progressive inclusive voices have the number of votes, at least in the US, in central conferences. Not in central conferences, in jurisdictions. So that means the bishops that will be elected in the US will all be inclusive bishops because there are, hopefully, because there are only inclusive delegates going, or a majority of inclusive delegates going. And so that also really shapes the future of the church as well. And I think that, my hope is that the inclusive voices would keep the church and that the exclusive voices, if they felt like they needed to leave, would leave, which is why the Next Generation UMC plan, sponsored by UMC Next or written by some of the folks of UMC Next, gives a more, allows churches to leave with less of a fine than before because, this isn't a hostile situation. We don't want to hold anyone hostage. So if you really can't see God in queer people, fine. Take your stuff and go. I'm sorry to see you leave, and I would prefer that you stay and we have this conversation and we see God in each other. But yeah, so would I stay and fight? Yes, because I would hope that it's the inclusive church that is, even if we change things at the top, even if we take out the harmful language from our book of discipline, if we say, sure, queer people can be pastors because of course they're people of God, it's still going to take grassroots work in every community around the world to really understand sexuality and to say, this is really what sexuality is, and this is what it means to be called by God as a queer person. So yeah, I would stay, and the work of transforming each community will continue long beyond transforming just our structure. So that is about all the time we have for this week's episode of Teaology. I hope that you tell your friends about this. Next Monday, we'll meet, same time, same place, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time here in my dorm room, but you're not in my dorm room. So let me know your thoughts in the comments here. And thanks. Remember to subscribe and like and share and invite all your friends. Follow me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at It's Me, JJ Warren. Thanks again, everybody, for your support and for your questions and for this space and for making our church a safe space for all people. Have a great night. Bye.